Before we begin, I'd like to ask you for a small favor. I'm working really hard to reach my goal of 1,000 subscribers. It's a truly important milestone for me. Please click the subscribe button on the channel. It's just one click, but it gives me massive motivation to keep making more videos. Thank you all so much. Alejandro Castillo stood frozen in the doorway. His daughter was eating. After 2 full weeks of not tasting a single thing, Sofia was slowly chewing a tiny piece of cheese toast. Alejandro covered his mouth with his hand. Tears immediately welled in his eyes, and he could only think one thing. How had they gotten here? 6 months prior, his wife Elena had died in a car accident on the outskirts of Madrid. There was no warning, no goodbye, a pre-dawn call, a hospital, and then silence. His 3-year-old daughter had never truly understood what had happened. She only knew that Mommy wasn't coming back, and something inside her broke. First, she stopped laughing. Then she stopped playing. Then she almost stopped talking altogether. And 2 weeks ago, she had stopped eating. Alejandro Castillo was one of the wealthiest businessmen in Spain. He owned hotels, investments, entire buildings in Madrid and Barcelona. He could buy anything, except a solution to save his daughter. He hired the country's top pediatricians, psychologists, nutritionists, child grief specialists. They all tried to reach Sofia. None succeeded. The girl simply sat in silence, staring at the walls as if the world had disappeared with her mother. Each day she grew thinner, more withdrawn, more distant. Alejandro would spend hours sitting beside her, begging her to eat something, anything, promising her toys, trips, whatever she wanted, but Sofia wouldn't even look up at him. Mrs. Vega, the woman who had helped raise Sofia since she was a baby, cried in secret every time she saw the little girl refuse another plate of food. The entire house had begun to feel like an endless funeral. And then came Lucia Romero, a quiet young woman from a humble neighborhood in southern Madrid, where people learned to survive before they even learned to dream. When Mrs. Vega explained Sofia's situation, Lucia showed no surprise. She showed understanding, because when she was 7, she too had lost her mother and remembered perfectly what it felt like to not want to live anymore. That same afternoon, Lucia went up to Sofia's room. She didn't try to force her to eat. She didn't talk like a doctor. She didn't try to fix her. She simply sat beside her and began to tell her stories about her own mother, about grief, about missing someone so much that breathing hurt. Sofia's eyes flickered for a mere second, almost imperceptibly, but Lucia saw it. The next morning, Lucia prepared something simple. Nothing fancy, nothing healthy, according to the experts. Just toast with butter and warm cheese. The kind of food that smells like home. She sat beside Sofia and began to eat herself, slowly, without pressure, without insistence. Sofia watched her every move, every bite. And then, for the first time in 14 days, the little girl slowly reached out her hand. Alejandro was downstairs when Mrs. Vega rushed into the kitchen, unable to even speak properly. "She's eating." Alejandro didn't believe her. He ran upstairs and froze in the doorway. There was his daughter, holding a small piece of warm toast in her hands, chewing slowly as tears streamed down her cheeks, and sitting beside her, a woman he barely knew. Before continuing, subscribe and give the video a like, and tell me where in the world you are watching this story from. Because if you have ever felt helpless watching someone you love slowly fade away, you need to see what happens next. Because sometimes God sends help from the most unexpected places. Lucia's first morning in that house began before dawn. She took the train from her neighborhood as she watched Madrid slowly wake up behind the steamy windows. When she arrived at the elegant building in the Salamanca district, the sky was barely beginning to lighten. Mrs. Vega let her in through the service entrance. The kitchen was larger than the entire apartment Lucia had lived in her whole life. Everything gleamed. Stainless steel, white marble, enormous windows overlooking the city, still gray from winter. Mrs. Vega spoke little, merely handing her an apron. Breakfast for the girl first. Lucia began to cut fruit in silence. The knife tapped softly on the board. Everything else was completely quiet. No television, no music, no conversations. Just silence. After a few minutes, Mrs. Vega appeared with a tray. Scrambled eggs, orange juice, toast cut carefully into triangles. Lucia watched as she arranged everything with extreme care, as if she were preparing something sacred. "Does she ever ask for anything?" Lucia asked softly. Mrs. Vega shook her head slowly. "She hardly speaks at all anymore, not since her mother died." Lucia's chest tightened immediately. She knew that kind of silence perfectly. That silence that swallows everything you are. 15 minutes later, Mrs. Vega came back down. The tray was untouched, the eggs cold, the bread dry, the juice untouched. The woman set the tray on the counter and stared out the window, her eyes full of tears. Lucia slowly dried her hands. How long has it been like this? 2 weeks without eating, but disappearing. Months appearing. The word hung in the air. Slow footsteps were heard from above. Heavy. "It's Mr. Castillo," Mrs. Vega whispered. "He hardly sleeps anymore." A moment later, Alejandro appeared in the kitchen. Dark suit, exhausted face, empty eyes. He looked like a man surviving, only because he hadn't yet learned to give up. He took coffee, without looking at anyone. Lucia spoke softly. "Good morning, sir." Alejandro barely looked up. The new employee. It wasn't a question. "Yes, sir." "Lucia Romero." He nodded slowly. Then he asked something unexpected. "How long do you think you'll last here?" The question didn't sound cruel, just tired. Lucia held his gaze. "As long as Sofia needs me." For the first time, something shifted slightly on Alejandro's face. Not hope, not yet, but no surprise. And without saying anything more, he slowly left the kitchen. Mrs. Vega let out a sigh when Alejandro was gone. "He's a good man," she said quietly, "but he doesn't know how to fight something he can't control." Lucia looked at the untouched tray on the counter. She thought of Sofia upstairs, a 3-year-old girl who had stopped eating because the world had stopped making sense. And she thought of her own mother, of that 7-year-old girl she had been, not understanding why God was taking the person she loved most. Then she whispered so low that Mrs. Vega couldn't hear her. "I don't know how, sir, but if you brought me here, don't let me waste it." Upstairs, Sofia sat on the floor of her room, knees pulled to her chest, her gaze fixed on a photograph of her mother. In the picture, Elena was smiling. Sofia hadn't smiled in 6 months. She didn't know that someone downstairs had just prayed for her. But somewhere very deep, in a part of herself she couldn't even name, something stirred, like the first breath before waking. Lucia spent the rest of the morning learning the rhythm of the house. She wiped down countertops that were already spotless. She tidied cupboards that didn't need tidying. She kept her hands busy, while her mind stayed upstairs. Around 10, Mrs. Vega came down again with another untouched tray. The eggs already cold, the bread dry at the edges, the juice still in the glass, as if it too had lost all hope. Mrs. Vega threw the food away without a word. Lucia watched her in silence. What does she do all day? The woman took a few seconds to answer. She sits in her room. She stares at the walls. Sometimes she looks at pictures of her mother. Her voice cracked. That's all. Her father goes up to see her every few hours. He talks to her. He reads her stories. He begs her to eat. Mrs. Vega shook her head sadly. But she doesn't respond. It's as if she's not here anymore. Lucia felt a knot in her throat. She knew that feeling. Continuing to breathe, but not really being alive. Just waiting, waiting for the pain to stop, or waiting to stop feeling anything at all. She turned to the sink and began to scrub a pan that didn't need scrubbing. Silently, she prayed again. God, I don't know what you want me to do here, but show me. At noon, Alejandro came down again. He moved like a man carrying a weight no one else could see. Shoulders tight, jaw clenched. He stood by the counter, staring at his phone, but Lucia noticed he wasn't reading anything. His eyes were fixed, empty. She placed a plate in front of him, a simple turkey and cheese sandwich. Nothing special. Alejandro looked at it as if he had forgotten what food was. You should eat something, sir, Lucia said softly. He almost smiled. Almost. That's what I tell her. It's different when someone reminds you that you're not alone. Alejandro looked up. This time, he truly saw her. Did you lose someone? It wasn't a question. Lucia nodded. My mother. When I was 7. The silence between them deepened. I stopped eating for a while too, she continued, until my grandmother would sit with me every day and remind me that I was still here for a reason. Alejandro's eyes filled with tears. He quickly looked away, but Lucia caught his glimpse. I don't know what to do, he whispered. I've tried everything. Lucia's voice was soft, but firm. Maybe she doesn't need you to fix her. Maybe she just needs you to sit with her in the pain. Alejandro looked at her for a long moment. Then he picked up the sandwich and took a small bite. Not because he was hungry, but because someone had also just reminded him that he wasn't alone. Upstairs, Sophia pressed her knees tighter to her chest. She heard distant voices downstairs. Before, she would run when she heard her father's voice. Now, she just stayed still, waiting. Waiting for what, she didn't even know. But a tiny part of her heart was still listening. That afternoon, the light filtering through the windows turned golden and soft. Lucia was drying dishes when Mrs. Vega came in with the dinner tray. A small bowl of soup, crackers, apple slices cut into stars. Lucia watched as the woman placed everything down with tenderness. Mrs. Vega, the woman looked up. Can I take it up this time? Mrs. Vega froze. It's not necessary. I know. Lucia held her gaze. But I would like to try. Mrs. Vega studied her face. She found no arrogance, no pity, only calmness. Finally, she nodded. If Mr. Castillo gets angry, I won't be able to protect you. I understand. Lucia took the tray with both hands. The stairs seemed longer than ever. Each step was heavy, not because of the tray, but because of what awaited her upstairs. The second-floor hallway was lined with photographs. Sophia as a baby. Sophia laughing on a swing. Sophia in her mother's arms. Both of them smiling, as if nothing bad could ever happen. Lucia's chest ached. She stopped in front of the door. It was slightly ajar. She knocked softly. Sophia. My name is Lucia. I brought you dinner. Silence. She pushed the door open slowly. The room was light blue, filled with toys that hadn't been touched in months. Stuffed animals lined the shelves. A dollhouse perfectly arranged, and on the floor, sitting with her back against the bed, was Sophia. Lucia held her breath. The girl looked so small, so fragile, as if one too loud word might make her disappear. Lucia placed the tray on a dresser, not in front of her, not too close, just there. Then she brought a chair, but left distance there too, 5 or 6 steps, and sat down. No, Sophia. But she continued. After Mom died, you stopped reading me stories. You stopped tucking me in. Her voice was small, fragile. You were here, but you weren't here. Alejandro began to cry openly, without trying to hide it, without the strength to do so. I thought you didn't love me anymore. Jessica closed her eyes for a second. It was too painful. Alejandro immediately hugged his daughter. My God, no, princess, never. His voice broke completely. I always loved you. Always. I was just scared. Sophia slowly lifted her gaze. Scared of what? Alejandro breathed with difficulty. Of losing you, just like I lost Mom. The room fell into absolute silence. So I worked. I kept myself busy. I convinced myself that if I could get you the best doctors, the best help, I could keep you safe. She covered her eyes for a moment, but I didn't notice. She couldn't finish the sentence. Sophia gently touched her tear-streaked cheek. You left me alone, Daddy. Alejandro let out a sob. I know. He kissed her small hands repeatedly. And I'm so sorry. Jessica watched the scene, crying silently. Now she understood everything. Sophia hadn't stopped eating out of caprice or illness. A 3-year-old girl had simply tried to process pain the only way her little heart could understand. If Mom left, I can leave too. Sophia looked at her father again. You're going to leave again. Alejandro immediately held both of her hands. Never again. His voice was firm for the first time in months. I promise. Never again. Sophia remained quiet for a few seconds. Then she looked at Jessica. Do you think Mom wants me to go with her? Jessica felt her heart break all over again. She leaned gently towards the girl. No, sweetheart. Her voice trembled slightly. I think your mom is watching you from heaven right now. Sophia listened attentively. And you know what she wants? The girl shook her head slowly. Jessica smiled tenderly. She wants you to stay here. To grow up. To laugh. To play. To eat hot toast on Sundays. Tears filled Sophia's eyes again. But I miss her so much. And you'll always miss her. Jessica gently stroked her hair. But missing someone and continuing to live can coexist. Sophia remained quiet for a long time. Then she looked at her father again. Daddy, will you stay with me tonight? Alejandro felt his chest ache. Every night, princess. Starting today, and for the first time since Elena's death, Sophia closed her eyes, feeling safe again. Alejandro didn't leave Sophia's room that night. He sat by her bed, watching her sleep, as if he were afraid she would disappear again, not looking away for even a second. The girl's breathing was soft, calm. Her small hand rested on the blanket, her fingers slightly curled. She seemed too small to have carried such a burden of pain. At 3 a.m., Jessica appeared silently at the door with a cup of hot coffee. She said nothing, just placed it on the nightstand and began to leave. Jessica, she stopped. Alejandro slowly looked up at her. The dim hallway light partially illuminated his tired face. How did you know? Jessica took a few seconds to answer. Know what? What I needed. What we all needed. She remained silent for a moment, then spoke softly. I didn't really know. Alejandro watched her intently. I just remembered what it feels like to be completely alone. Alejandro's voice cracked. I left her alone. Jessica shook her head slowly. You were drowning too. That's not an excuse. He covered his face with his hands. My own daughter thought I didn't love her anymore. Jessica slowly walked over and sat in another chair by the bed. She didn't stop loving you. She just stopped knowing how to reach you. Alejandro looked at the sleeping Sophia. I should have known. I'm her father. Jessica spoke calmly. Grief does strange things. Sometimes we push away the very people we love most, because loving them also hurts too much. Alejandro closed his eyes. Tears reappeared. I almost lost her. Jessica watched him in silence, but she hadn't lost him. He slowly looked up, because a stranger entered my house and saw something I no longer could. Jessica shook her head gently. It wasn't me who saved her. Alejandro frowned slightly. Then who? Jessica looked at Sophia. Her father returned. The room became completely still. Alejandro felt his chest ache because he knew it was true. Sophia didn't just need doctors, or experts, or millions of euros. She needed her father to return to her emotionally, and that night he finally had. They remained silent for a long time. Finally, Alejandro spoke again. When Elena died, I promised myself I had to stay strong. His voice was barely a whisper. I couldn't break down because Sofia needed me. He looked at his own hands. But I was breaking down every day. I just did it, where she couldn't see it. Jessica nodded slowly. Then she thought you had moved on without her. Alejandro swallowed. Or she thought she had to follow her mother. Silence filled the room again. Jessica reached out and gently squeezed his hand. Now he's here. That's what matters. Alejandro looked at that hand on his way, and for the first time in a very long time, he felt something akin to calm. The next morning, Mrs. Vega was already awake, preparing breakfast, even before the sun rose. Jessica entered the kitchen, still tired. The woman looked up immediately. "How is Sofia?" Jessica smiled softly. "Sleeping. Truly." Mrs. Vega's eyes filled with tears again. "I heard what you said last night." Jessica lowered her gaze. "Yes." The woman slowly placed her hands on the counter. "That poor child, carrying all of that alone." Jessica took a deep breath. She's not alone anymore. Mrs. Vega watched her in silence for a few seconds. Then she asked something important. "You're staying, right?" Jessica looked out the window. The sky was slowly beginning to clear over Madrid. A new day. "If they want me to stay." Mrs. Vega smiled faintly. "They need you." Jessica remained quiet. Then she said very softly, "I think we need them too." Upstairs. Alejandro had finally fallen asleep in the chair by Sofia's bed. His hand rested near the girl's small hand, and for the first time in months, neither of them was alone in their grief. The following weeks completely changed the house. Sofia started eating every day. First small amounts, then more. Color slowly returned to her cheeks. Light returned to her eyes. She started talking again, asking questions, telling absurd stories like only young children know how to do. And little by little, the house that had felt like a tomb began to feel like a home again. Alejandro also changed. He stopped working 16 hours a day. He started coming home early. Every night he read Sofia stories before bed, and every Sunday they made hot toast together. It became their ritual. Sofia would climb onto a small stool in the kitchen, while Jessica helped her spread butter on the bread. Alejandro cooked in the pan, pretending to be a professional chef, and the three of them ended up having breakfast together in the kitchen. Not in the vast, elegant dining room that no one used anymore, but there, nearby, like a family. One Sunday morning, about a month after all of that, Sofia looked up from her plate. "Miss Jessica." "Yes, sweetheart. Do you think my mom and yours are friends in heaven?" Jessica felt an immediate knot in her chest, but she smiled. "I think they're best friends." Sofia smiled happily. Then they aren't alone. Alejandro discreetly looked away so they wouldn't see his eyes filling with tears. After breakfast, they went for a walk in the park. The air was cold, but the sun shone brightly. Sofia ran towards the swings, laughing. Jessica and Alejandro walked behind her slowly. Then Alejandro spoke in a low voice. "I can never thank you enough." Jessica shook her head softly. "You don't need to." He looked at her. "You gave me my daughter back." Jessica held his gaze. She never truly left. Alejandro remained quiet. Jessica continued. She was just waiting for her father to come home. And for the first time, Alejandro felt something stir deeply within him as he looked at her. Something warm. Something he had long believed dead. That night, after Sofia had fallen asleep, Alejandro found Jessica in the kitchen. She was slowly washing dishes while humming a soft song. The warm kitchen light partially illuminated her face. For the first time since Elena's death, the house no longer felt empty. "Jessica." She looked up. "I need to tell you something." Jessica's heart began to beat faster. Of course. Alejandro took a deep breath. He seemed nervous. Something completely foreign to a man accustomed to controlling every situation in his life. These past few weeks. He paused for a moment. Seeing you with Sofia. Seeing how you changed this house. How you changed us. Jessica remained motionless, listening. Alejandro swallowed slowly. I realized something. She felt she could barely breathe. What? He looked her directly in the eyes and finally spoke the truth that had been quietly growing within him for weeks. I'm falling in love with you. The air seemed to stop. Jessica felt her chest ache. Alejandro spoke quickly. I'm not asking for anything. I just needed you to know. His voice became lower, more vulnerable. You gave my daughter her life back. And me too. Jessica's eyes were full of tears. Alejandro took a small step towards her. I didn't know I could still feel something like this after losing Elena. Jessica smiled through her tears. I did. He blinked, confused. What? Jessica let out a small, nervous laugh. Because I fell in love with you too. Alejandro stood completely still. Jessica took a deep breath. I fell in love with the man who returned for his daughter. The man who decided to stay, even when he was broken. Tears began to fall down Alejandro's face again. This time, they weren't just sadness. They were relief, hope. Jessica took a step towards him. And I fell in love with the family we built, without even realizing it. Alejandro slowly raised a hand to her face, as if he still couldn't believe it was real. And then he kissed her softly, gently, like two wounded people afraid of breaking something precious. When they separated, they were both crying and smiling at the same time. Jessica let out a small laugh through her tears. And now what do we do? Alejandro looked towards the stairs where Sofia slept and replied, the truth. The next morning, Sofia entered the kitchen, still half asleep. She wore pink pajamas and clutched one of her stuffed animals. Then she stopped. Jessica and Alejandro were making pancakes together, and they were holding hands. Sofia watched them for several seconds, very seriously, as if analyzing something extremely important. Finally, she asked, Are you going to get married? The two of them started to laugh, surprised. Alejandro crouched down beside her. Maybe one day you'll be bothered by that. Sofia thought about it with absolute seriousness. Only if we keep eating toast on Sundays. Jessica let out a laugh that was meant to last forever. Sofia seemed satisfied. Then yes. And she threw herself to hug them both at the same time. In that instant, something new was born within that house. Not just healing, not just happiness. Family. 6 months after Jessica arrived at the Castillo's attic, everything was different. Not the walls, not the furniture, nor the huge windows overlooking Madrid, but the life within them. Sofia turned 4 in September. They had a small party, nothing over the top. Just a few children from preschool. Mrs. Vega and the 3 of them. There was cake, balloons, laughter. And Sofia blowing out her candles as everyone sang. When the last guest left, Sofia climbed onto Jessica's lap. I have something for you. She pulled a carefully folded piece of paper from her pocket. Jessica unfolded it slowly. It was a drawing. 4 people holding hands. A tall man, a dark-haired woman, a little girl, and Jessica. At the top, written in childish letters, it read, My family. But there was something else. In a corner, Sofia had drawn another small figure among the clouds. Her mother, watching them from above. Jessica felt tears instantly welling in her eyes. Sofia pointed at the drawing. Mom is in heaven with your mom. But she's still a part of us, right? Jessica hugged the little girl tightly. Always, sweetie. Sofia looked up. I think Mom sent you here. Jessica gently kissed her forehead. I think so too. That night, after Sofia was asleep, Alejandro and Jessica stepped out onto the balcony. Madrid glittered below them, thousands of lights illuminating the city. Alejandro slowly took Jessica's hand. "I've been doing a lot of thinking." She smiled. "That sounds dangerous." He let out a small laugh. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small box. Jessica stopped breathing. "Alejandro." He opened the box slowly. A simple, elegant, perfect ring. "I'm not good at speeches." His voice trembled. "But I know one thing." He looked her directly in the eyes. "I don't want to live the rest of my life without you." Tears began to stream down Jessica's face. Alejandro continued. "You walked into this house when we were broken and showed us it was still possible to live again." He took a deep breath. "Will you marry me?" Jessica couldn't even speak. She just nodded, crying. Alejandro slipped the ring onto her finger and held her as they both laughed and cried at the same time. 3 months later, they were married in a small ceremony. Sophia was the one who threw the flowers, just as she had insisted. And during the vows, the little girl stood between them, holding both their hands. A family. Not the one either of them had expected, but the one life had slowly built from the ruins of grief. That night, after the wedding, the three of them sat together in the living room. Sophia was curled between Alejandro and Jessica, on the sofa, half asleep, but absolutely refusing to go to bed. "Tell me the story again," she murmured. Alejandro smiled wearily. "What story?" Sophia barely lifted her head. "The one about how Jessica got here." Jessica let out a small laugh. "You've heard it 100 times. I want to hear it again." Alejandro watched his daughter for a few seconds and began. He told her about that first morning, about the quiet girl who arrived from the south of Madrid before sunrise, about how she sat down beside a little girl who no longer wanted to live, about the warm cheese toast that changed absolutely everything. Sophia listened, with her eyes half closed and a small, peaceful smile on her face. When Alejandro finished the story, the little girl whispered softly, "Daddy." "Yes, princess. I'm so glad I stayed." Alejandro's chest tightened immediately. Jessica began to cry too. Alejandro slowly kissed his daughter's head. "Me too, sweetie. Me too." Sophia opened her eyes for just an instant. She looked at Jessica, then at her father, and said something neither of them would ever forget. "I think this is what Mommy wanted." Jessica's voice cracked. "What, honey?" Sophia smiled very softly. "For us to be happy again." The room fell completely silent, but it wasn't the cold, empty silence from before. This was peace. Jessica slowly stroked the girl's hair. "I think you're right." Sophia yawned. "Tomorrow we can make pancakes." Alejandro let out a small laugh. "Of course we can." Sophia closed her eyes again. "And toast on Sundays." Jessica smiled through her tears. "Always." Minutes later, Sophia was fast asleep between them. Alejandro and Jessica remained still, watching her breathe. Neither of them wanted to break the moment. Finally, Jessica whispered, "We did it." Alejandro shook his head slowly. "We didn't do it. We three did." He looked at his daughter, healthy, happy, alive. Then he looked at Jessica, his wife, the woman who walked into a broken house and decided to stay. And for the first time since Elena's death, he felt true peace. Not perfect peace. The grief was still there. Elena would always be missing. But now, the love was no longer buried beneath the pain. Now they coexisted, like real life. Outside, the lights of Madrid glittered under the night. But inside that house, there was warmth, laughter, hope, and absolute proof of something important. Healing doesn't come from money, or power, or even just time. Healing comes when someone decides to sit in the pain with you, when someone stays, when someone reminds you that it's still worth living. Sophia shifted slightly in her sleep and mumbled something almost inaudible. Jessica leaned in softly. "What did you say, sweetie?" Sophia smiled with her eyes closed. I love you very much. Tears once again filled Alejandro's eyes. He gently kissed his daughter's forehead. We love you too, princess. Jessica slowly embraced them both, and for a few seconds, the three of them remained like that, as if the whole world had stopped just to let them breathe. Alejandro thought of everything that had happened. Elena's death, the weeks of silence, the fear, the guilt, the despair, and then Jessica walking into that kitchen before dawn. A stranger, a humble woman who didn't arrive with titles or magic solutions. She just arrived with empathy, with patience, with the ability to stay when others no longer knew what to do, and that ended up saving them all. The billionaire's daughter stopped eating for 2 weeks, but that was never really the story. The real story was what happened next, when a simple woman walked into a broken home and reminded everyone inside it that they still deserved to fight to keep living, because true love doesn't abandon, and because sometimes the greatest miracles don't even look like miracles. They look like people becoming family. They look like warm toast on Sunday mornings. They look like a little girl learning to live again, and a father finally coming home.